Boone Fork Valley, North Carolina, October 1877. While every settler raced to complete their cabins before winter, William Hodges was still hauling flat stones up the mountainside in his 7th week of construction. His neighbors called it wasteful. They called him a fool. He was building a hearth that extended 6 feet into his cabin, 3 times deeper than standard frontier construction. The massive stone platform consumed 1/4 of his 16 by 20-foot cabin's floor space, requiring 1,800 pounds of carefully selected stones. Samuel McKinney shook his head, saying that hearth was bigger than his entire sleeping area. Local mason Dutch Heinrich, who'd built 40 fireplaces in these mountains, declared 2 feet plenty for any family. Settlement leader James Wilson predicted that come February, Hodges would wish he had more living space and less stone floor. Then January 15th arrived. Arctic air dropped temperatures to 18 below zero, the coldest in local memory. 6 consecutive days below zero tested every heating system in the valley. Standard cabins failed. Families crowded into single rooms, abandoning the rest of their homes. Water froze solid inside cabins despite continuous fires. But Hodges's family? They slept comfortably on that massive stone hearth, the heated platform radiating warmth through the night, while neighbors burned through entire monthly firewood supplies in 4 days. What did this Tennessee mountain man understand about storing and releasing heat that everyone else missed? If you value stories of practical wisdom that stood the test of time, make sure to subscribe. We've got more documented accounts worth remembering. Comment your city and time. We love reading where these documentaries reach. The autumn of 1877 brought an unusual sight to the Boone Fork Valley of western North Carolina. While established settlers like Samuel McKinney and Dutch Heinrich watched their neighbors complete standard frontier cabins in 3 to 4 weeks, a newcomer from eastern Tennessee was entering his 7th week of construction with no roof in sight. William Hodges, 34 years old and carrying the quiet determination of a man who had survived the Great Smoky Mountains, continued hauling flat sandstone slabs up the mountainside long after sensible men had moved on to chinking logs and laying floor planks. The source of community bewilderment centered on Hodges's fireplace hearth, which had already consumed 18 days of construction time and showed no signs of nearing completion. Where conventional frontier wisdom called for hearths extending 18 to 24 inches into cabin interiors, a size requiring 4 to 6 days of stonework and roughly 400 to 600 pounds of material, Hodges was methodically laying a platform that stretched 6 feet deep into his 16 by 20-foot cabin. The mathematical reality was stark. His hearth would consume 120 square feet of interior space, fully 25% of his total floor area. Samuel McKinney, whose own cabin hearth followed the standard 2-foot depth that had served Virginia settlers for generations, found himself walking over to observe Hodges's progress with increasing frequency. "That man's building a hearth bigger than my whole sleeping area," he told his wife Martha one evening, shaking his head as he watched Hodges carefully fitting another course of stones. Waste of good cabin space, if you ask me. The criticism carried weight in a community where every square foot of interior space meant the difference between cramped discomfort and adequate living conditions through the long mountain winter. Dutch Heinrich, the settlement's master mason who had emigrated from Germany 23 years earlier, brought professional authority to the growing skepticism. Heinrich's credentials were unquestionable. He had built over 40 fireplaces throughout the western North Carolina mountains, each one following European-trained principles adapted to frontier conditions. His standard design called for hearths extending exactly 24 inches into cabin interiors, a measurement he had refined through decades of experience balancing heating efficiency with material conservation. "I've built 40 fireplaces in these mountains," Heinrich declared to anyone within earshot. 2 feet is plenty for any family. Hodges is either a fool or has more money than sense. The mathematical burden of Hodges's design became increasingly apparent as October progressed. Where Heinrich's standard hearths required approximately 500 pounds of stone, a manageable load for most settlers, Hodges' massive platform demanded 1,800 pounds of carefully selected flat stones. Each stone required individual evaluation for thermal properties, structural integrity, and fitting characteristics. The additional 1,300 pounds of material represented 3 to 4 weeks of extra labor, time that other settlers used to complete roofing, chinking, and interior finishing work. Settlement leader James Wilson, a North Carolina native whose Civil War logistics experience had taught him the value of efficient resource allocation, watched Hodges's project with growing concern. Wilson had founded the Boone Fork settlement in 1874 by applying military principles to frontier organization. Establish shelter quickly, conserve materials, follow proven methods. Hodges' approach violated every principle of practical frontier construction. Come February, Wilson predicted to the assembled men at the settlement's informal evening gatherings, "He'll wish he had more living space and less stone floor." The criticism intensified as neighboring families moved into completed cabins while Hodges continued his meticulous stonework. McKinney's cabin, built according to standard specifications, featured a comfortable hearth extending 20 inches into the interior, surrounded by ample living space for his family of 4. Heinrich's own dwelling showcased professional masonry work, a perfectly proportioned fireplace that heated efficiently without sacrificing interior room. Wilson's cabin demonstrated military precision in its construction timeline, completed in exactly 3 weeks with materials calculated to avoid waste. Yet Hodges persisted with quiet determination that puzzled his neighbors. When questioned about his methods, he offered only brief explanations that revealed knowledge sources unfamiliar to most frontier builders. "Stone holds heat long after wood stops burning," he told McKinney during one of their conversations. "A big hearth is like a bank. You deposit heat all evening, withdraw it all night." The analogy seemed reasonable in theory, but the practical reality of sacrificing 25% of cabin interior space for unproven heating benefits struck most settlers as impractical experimentation they could not afford. The technical specifications of Hodges's project became community conversation throughout October. His hearth platform measured exactly 6 feet deep by 8 feet wide, requiring stones fitted with precision to create a level sleeping surface. Unlike conventional hearths built primarily for functional heating, Hodges was constructing what appeared to be an oversized stone bed positioned directly in front of his fireplace opening. The 8-inch thickness of the platform demanded flat sandstone slabs, selected for their ability to store and release heat gradually, materials that required extensive searching in local quarries and creek beds. As November approached and the first frost warnings appeared in morning valleys, the contrast between Hodges's unfinished cabin and his neighbors' completed dwellings became increasingly stark. McKinney had already begun seasoning firewood and testing his heating system during cold snaps. Heinrich was fine-tuning his chimney draft and checking mortar joints for winter readiness. Wilson had completed all winterization tasks and was helping newer settlers prepare their cabins for the coming cold. Hodges, meanwhile, continued laying stones with methodical precision that ignored community pressure and approaching weather. His 1,800 pounds of carefully selected sandstone represented not just weeks of extra labor, but a fundamental disagreement with accepted frontier building practices. The massive thermal mass he was creating would either vindicate his unconventional approach or prove his neighbors correct about the folly of sacrificing precious interior space for unproven heating theories learned in the Tennessee mountains of his youth. By early November 1877, Hodges had completed his thermal mass hearth system, and the finished structure defied every convention of frontier fireplace construction. The primary firebox maintained standard dimensions, 3 feet wide and 4 feet high, but the hearth platform extending from it measured 6 feet deep, 8 feet wide, and 8 inches thick. The 1,800 pounds of carefully fitted flat stones created a smooth, level surface that served as both heat storage system and sleeping platform, positioned to capture maximum radiant energy from the fireplace opening. The scientific principles underlying Hodges's design remained invisible to his neighbors, who saw only an oversized stone floor consuming valuable cabin space. Stone absorbs heat at approximately 2/10 of a British thermal unit per pound per degree Fahrenheit, meaning Hodges's 1,800-pound hearth could theoretically store over 10,000 BTUs when heated from 50 degrees to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. This stored energy represented enough heat to warm his cabin for 6 to 8 hours without additional fuel, a thermal battery that conventional frontier hearths could never match. The first demonstration of the system's capabilities came during a November cold snap when temperatures dropped to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Hodges built an intense fire beginning at 4 in the afternoon, feeding oak and hickory logs steadily until 10 o'clock in the evening. The flames heated the stone platform surface to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to warm hands pressed against the surface, but comfortable enough for direct contact. At precisely 10 o'clock, Hodges extinguished the fire completely, swept the hearth clean, and laid canvas and wool bedding directly on the heated stones. Samuel McKinney, observing through his cabin window, watched in disbelief as the Hodges family prepared their sleeping arrangements on what appeared to be a stone floor. McKinney's own heating strategy followed conventional frontier wisdom, banking coals to maintain small fires throughout the night, a method that consumed 4 to 5 cords of firewood per winter and provided 3 to 4 hours of residual heat maximum. His family slept in the warmest corner of their cabin, often waking to frozen water buckets and interior temperatures barely above freezing. The morning after Hodges's first full system demonstration revealed the dramatic effectiveness of thermal mass heating. While McKinney's cabin registered 38 degrees Fahrenheit at dawn, despite his overnight banking efforts, the Hodges cabin maintained an interior temperature of 57 degrees Fahrenheit. The stone hearth continued radiating stored heat 8 hours after the fire had died, creating a warm zone that extended throughout the 16 by 20-foot interior space. Dutch Heinrich, whose professional reputation rested on proven fireplace construction methods, found himself questioning decades of building experience. Heinrich's standard approach involved maintaining fires through the night, using carefully banked coals, a technique that required constant attention and substantial fuel consumption. His own cabin, built according to German masonry principles adapted for frontier conditions, achieved reasonable heating efficiency but demanded continuous fire management to prevent dangerous overnight temperature drops. The technical advantages of Hodges' system became measurable through daily observation. Where conventional frontier heating required 4 to 5 hours of evening fire building, followed by overnight fuel management, Hodges burned intense fires for exactly 3 to 4 hours and then slept soundly on his heated stone platform. The elimination of overnight fires removed carbon monoxide risks, reduced fuel consumption, and provided consistent radiant heat that conventional heating could never match. James Wilson, whose military logistics training emphasized practical resource management, began calculating the economic implications of Hodges' method. Wilson's own cabin heating costs averaged 4 cords of firewood per winter, requiring substantial labor for cutting, splitting, and hauling. Hodges' projected fuel consumption of 2.5 cords represented a 40% reduction that translated to significant savings in time and physical effort. Resources Wilson understood were precious commodities in frontier survival. The comfort differential between heating systems became apparent to anyone visiting the respective cabins during cold November evenings. Standard frontier cabins featured temperature zones ranging from uncomfortably hot near the fireplace to dangerously cold in distant corners, creating areas where water froze despite continuous fires. Hodges' thermal mass system distributed heat evenly throughout the interior space, maintaining consistent temperatures that eliminated the hot and cold zones plaguing conventional construction. By late November, curiosity began replacing outright skepticism as neighbors observed the practical results of thermal mass heating. McKinney's wife Martha noted that she could see steam rising from the Hodges cabin windows throughout the morning hours, indicating interior warmth that persisted long after their own fires required rebuilding. Heinrich found himself asking technical questions about stone selection criteria, mortar composition for thermal expansion, and fire building techniques optimized for maximum heat transfer. The knowledge sources behind Hodges' innovation gradually emerged through conversations with interested neighbors. His father, Thomas Hodges, had spent 30 years in the Tennessee mountains experimenting with Cherokee thermal cooking stone techniques observed during trade relationships with Native American communities. German immigrants from Pennsylvania had shared masonry stove principles during their westward migration through the Great Smoky Mountains. William had synthesized these traditional knowledge sources with practical experience gained during harsh Appalachian winters that tested conventional heating methods to their limits. The system refinements Hodges developed through November demonstrated his understanding of thermal dynamics beyond simple heat storage. Fire timing proved critical. Beginning at 4 in the afternoon allowed maximum heat accumulation before 10 o'clock sleeping time. Wood selection favored hardwoods like oak and hickory that burned at high temperatures for sustained periods. Stone arrangement required careful positioning to ensure even heat distribution across the platform surface. Bedding adaptation involved canvas and wool layers that provided comfort while allowing heat transfer from stones to sleeping bodies. Core skeptics maintained their positions despite mounting evidence of the system's effectiveness. "It's been a mild winter so far," McKinney insisted to anyone willing to listen. "Wait until real cold hits." Heinrich acknowledged the apparent success but questioned whether the complex system would prove reliable during extended severe weather. Wilson wondered if the method would scale beyond a single family's needs or prove adaptable to different cabin sizes and orientations. Yet the measurable results spoke with mathematical precision that skepticism could not dismiss. By December 1st, Hodges's firewood consumption registered 50% below the settlement average. His family reported the warmest nights of their frontier experience. They suffered none of the respiratory issues common with smoky overnight fires that plagued their neighbors. Most significantly, the community was beginning to recognize that Hodges's wasteful use of cabin space might represent practical wisdom rather than foolish experimentation. December 1877 provided the first sustained testing period for competing heating systems throughout the Boone Fork settlement. Early winter temperatures consistently dropped below freezing, creating conditions that revealed the stark differences between conventional frontier heating and Hodges's thermal mass approach. Temperature logs that Hodges began maintaining in a leather-bound journal showed interior readings that defied his neighbors' expectations and challenged their assumptions about adequate winter heating. Standard cabin interior temperatures throughout the settlement averaged 35 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit by morning, despite continuous fire management efforts. Samuel McKinney's cabin, representative of conventional construction, required constant attention to maintain even these marginal comfort levels. His family burned 2 to 3 cords of firewood monthly, a consumption rate that demanded daily cutting and hauling, even during the harshest weather. Martha McKinney often woke to find water frozen solid in their cabin's wash basin, despite Samuel's careful coal banking techniques learned from his Virginia mountain upbringing. The Hodges cabin consistently registered 55 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit by morning, temperatures that allowed normal daily activities without the layered clothing and restricted movement that characterized winter life for their neighbors. William's firewood consumption averaged 1.5 cords monthly, representing a dramatic reduction that freed substantial time and energy for other essential frontier tasks. The family's evening routine had evolved into a precise thermal management system that maximized heat storage while minimizing fuel requirements. Dutch Heinrich, whose professional mason training had convinced him that adequate heating required compromise between comfort and fuel efficiency, found himself reconsidering fundamental principles of fireplace construction. Heinrich's own cabin achieved reasonable heating through methods that balanced German masonry traditions with frontier material constraints. His family maintained interior temperatures in the low 40s through careful fire management, but the constant attention required for overnight heating left him questioning whether there might be superior approaches he had never considered. The growing interest among neighbors led to informal technical discussions that revealed the depth of traditional knowledge underlying Hodges's innovations. William freely shared information about his Cherokee-inspired stone heating techniques, explaining how Native American communities had used thermal cooking stones to store and release heat for food preparation and shelter warming. These methods, observed during his childhood in eastern Tennessee, demonstrated principles of heat storage that European frontier traditions had largely ignored. German immigrants' masonry stove principles provided another crucial knowledge source that Hodges had adapted to frontier conditions. Pennsylvania settlers moving westward through the Great Smoky Mountains had shared techniques for constructing thermal mass heating systems designed for sustained heat output rather than immediate warming. These methods required larger initial investments in materials and construction time, but delivered superior long-term efficiency and comfort. The third knowledge source came directly from William's father, Thomas Hodges, whose 30 years of experimentation in the Tennessee mountains had systematically tested various heat storage approaches during particularly harsh winters of the 1840s and 1850s. Thomas had documented methods for heating stone beds that provided all-night warmth without fire maintenance, techniques that William had learned through hands-on demonstration rather than theoretical explanation. Several neighbors began asking increasingly detailed technical questions that indicated serious consideration of adopting similar systems. McKinney inquired about stone selection criteria, specifically wanting to know how to identify sandstone with optimal thermal mass properties. Heinrich asked about mortar composition that could withstand the thermal expansion cycles created by repeated heating and cooling of massive stone platforms. Wilson questioned optimal fire building techniques that would maximize heat transfer efficiency while minimizing fuel consumption. Safety considerations emerged as a primary concern among potential adopters. The concept of sleeping directly on heated stones raised questions about burn risks and temperature regulation that conventional frontier heating had never required addressing. Hodges demonstrated his safety protocols, showing how canvas and wool bedding layers provided comfortable insulation while allowing beneficial heat transfer. Surface temperatures of 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit proved warm enough for effective heating but cool enough for safe direct contact through appropriate bedding materials. The doubters maintained their skepticism with arguments that winter's true test had not yet arrived. All that stone will just draw heat away from the living space, McKinney insisted, despite evidence suggesting exactly the opposite effect. One good blizzard, and we'll see who's built for survival, echoed Heinrich, whose professional reputation required defending conventional methods until overwhelming proof demanded reconsideration. Wilson worried that the complex system might fail during extreme conditions when reliable heating became a matter of life and death rather than mere comfort. Through December, Hodges continued refining his operational techniques based on daily temperature monitoring and fuel consumption tracking. Fire timing proved critical, beginning at 4 in the afternoon and maintaining intense flames until 6 o'clock created optimal stone heating without excessive fuel consumption. Wood selection favored oak and hickory for their high-temperature burning characteristics and sustained heat output. Stone arrangement required periodic adjustment to ensure even heat distribution across the platform's surface, preventing hot spots that could create uncomfortable sleeping conditions. Bedding adaptation evolved through trial and error as the family learned to balance comfort with heat transfer efficiency. Canvas provided durable base material that withstood direct stone contact while allowing heat conduction. Wool layers offered insulation that could be adjusted based on stone temperature and ambient air conditions. The combination created a sleeping system that captured maximum benefit from stored thermal energy while maintaining comfort throughout the night. The measurable results by year's end painted a compelling picture of thermal mass heating superiority. Hodges' family firewood consumption registered 50% below settlement average, translating to significant savings in labor and material costs. Sleeping comfort exceeded anything the family had experienced during previous frontier winters. Health benefits included elimination of respiratory issues commonly associated with smoky overnight fires that other families endured. Most importantly, community confidence in the method grew as neighbors observed consistent performance through December's varied weather conditions. James Wilson, whose military logistics experience had taught him to evaluate systems based on measurable outcomes rather than theoretical arguments, began documenting comparative data that would influence his own construction decisions. The economic advantages of reduced firewood requirements, combined with superior comfort levels and eliminated fire management demands, suggested practical benefits that transcended initial skepticism about unconventional building approaches. January 15, 1878, brought a massive Arctic front that would test every heating system in the Boone Fork settlement beyond its designed limits. The mercury plummeted to 18 degrees below zero, the coldest temperature in local memory, and remained there for 6 consecutive days. Sustained sub-zero conditions created a survival crisis that separated theoretical heating adequacy from practical life and death performance. Samuel McKinney burned through his entire monthly firewood allocation in 4 days, desperately feeding his fireplace around the clock in a futile attempt to maintain survivable interior temperatures. His cabin, built according to standard Virginia mountain specifications, could not retain heat against the relentless cold that penetrated chinking, froze mortar joints, and turned glass windows into sheets of ice. Martha McKinney moved the family into their single warmest room, abandoning the rest of their cabin to temperatures that dropped below zero despite continuous fires. Dutch Heinrich's family crowded into their kitchen area, the only space in their cabin where combined fireplace and cooking stove heat could maintain temperatures above freezing. Heinrich's professional masonry work, which had served 40 families adequately through normal winters, proved insufficient against the Arctic assault. Water froze solid inside his cabin within 3 feet of the fireplace, and ice formed on interior walls despite his desperate efforts to maintain heating fires that consumed wood faster than he could split and carry it. James Wilson faced the most serious crisis of his leadership tenure as settlement founder. 3 families abandoned their cabins temporarily, moving in with neighbors whose heating systems offered marginally better survival prospects. Firewood supplies throughout the community reached critically low levels as desperate residents burned furniture, fence posts, and stored lumber in attempts to generate adequate heat. Several cases of frostbite appeared among children and elderly residents, while cold-related respiratory illnesses struck families forced to breathe smoke-filled air from overworked fireplaces burning green wood and inappropriate materials. The Hodges cabin stood as a remarkable contrast to the settlement's suffering. Interior temperatures maintained 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit with William's normal fire schedule, requiring only a 25% increase in firewood consumption above his December usage. The family continued their established routine of heating the stone platform from 4 to 6 in the evening, then sleeping comfortably on the thermal mass hearth throughout the night. No frozen pipes or water supplies appeared inside their cabin, and normal daily activities proceeded without the extreme measures consuming their neighbors' lives. The dramatic visual contrast became undeniable by January 20th. Steam rose consistently from Hodges's cabin windows, while neighboring structures showed no exterior signs of interior warmth. Hodges' children played comfortably inside their cabin, while other families' children huddled together in multiple layers, unable to move freely in their frigid interiors. The sounds emerging from respective cabins told the story: normal conversation and activity from the Hodges dwelling, urgent discussions about fuel conservation, and survival strategies from everywhere else. Samuel McKinney's wife, Martha, watching through their single unfrozen window, observed the Hodges family's evening routine with growing desperation. While her own family prepared for another night of survival heating that would consume their dwindling firewood reserves, she could see William calmly extinguishing his fire at 6 o'clock and the family settling onto their heated stone platform for comfortable sleep. The contradiction between their situations had moved beyond mere comfort differences to become a matter of survival versus suffering. By January 22nd, the crisis had deepened into genuine community emergency. 3 families could no longer heat their cabins adequately and moved in temporarily with neighbors, creating overcrowded conditions that strained everyone's resources. Dutch Heinrich acknowledged that his professional expertise had failed under extreme conditions, admitting privately that conventional fireplace construction could not handle sustained sub-zero temperatures. James Wilson confronted the possibility that some families might not survive if the cold persisted much longer. The turning point came on January 24th when Hodges extended an invitation for a community meeting in his cabin. Neighbors entered to find interior conditions that defied their recent experience: 52 degrees Fahrenheit compared to their own cabin's 10 to 20 degree interiors. Children played normally on the warm hearthstones while their parents conducted conversation without the layered clothing that had become essential for survival elsewhere. The demonstration of thermal mass superiority was complete and undeniable. William used the gathering to provide technical explanations that revealed the physics underlying his system's success. The thermal mass effect of 1,800 pounds of stone storing and releasing heat, gradually created consistent interior temperatures that conventional heating could never achieve. 48 square feet of heated stone surface area radiated warmth continuously, providing thermal output equivalent to a small fire burning throughout the night. The warm stone platform created an insulation barrier with the cabin floor that prevented ground-based heat loss plaguing conventional construction. The efficiency calculations William presented demonstrated why his system succeeded where others failed. 3 hours of intense burning provided 8 hours of stored heat release, eliminating the fuel waste associated with maintaining overnight fires. The stone platform's thermal capacity could store enough energy during evening heating to maintain comfortable temperatures until morning, when the cycle repeated. This approach used fuel for maximum heat generation rather than marginal fire maintenance, achieving superior results with reduced resource consumption. Heinrich asked detailed questions about construction techniques that would allow him to recommend similar systems to desperate families. McKinney inquired about retrofitting existing cabins with expanded hearths, recognizing that his family's survival might depend on adopting superior heating methods. Wilson questioned the scalability of the approach for widespread community adoption, understanding that successful settlement required heating systems capable of handling extreme weather events. The community meeting in Hodges's warm cabin marked a decisive moment when theoretical skepticism collapsed under practical necessity. Families who had dismissed his methods as wasteful experimentation now faced the reality that conventional frontier heating could fail catastrophically during severe weather. The man they had called a fool for sacrificing living space to thermal mass construction had created the only reliably comfortable shelter in the entire settlement. As neighbors returned to their frigid cabins that evening, the contrast became a powerful motivator for change. The knowledge that superior heating methods existed, demonstrated under the most demanding conditions, transformed community attitudes from skepticism to urgent interest in learning techniques that could mean the difference between winter survival and winter suffering. By February 1878, the transformation of the Boone Fork settlement had begun with unprecedented urgency. Samuel McKinney started gathering flat stones during winter thaws, planning hearth expansion that would prevent his family from enduring another crisis like the January freeze. His wife, Martha, documented their winter firewood consumption, 4.5 cords compared to Hodges' 2 8/10 cords, mathematical evidence that convinced McKinney his Virginia mountain heating methods required fundamental revision. Dutch Heinrich abandoned his adequate is enough philosophy that had guided 2 decades of professional masonry work. The master craftsman, who had built over 40 standard fireplaces throughout western North Carolina, began studying Hodges' thermal mass construction with the systematic attention he had once reserved for European guild techniques. Heinrich's professional reputation, built on conventional methods, now depended on mastering innovations that a Tennessee settler had developed through traditional knowledge synthesis rather than formal training. James Wilson began gathering stones during February's brief warming periods, recognizing that community leadership required adopting superior survival methods before recommending them to other families. His military logistics experience had taught him that successful systems must prove reliable under extreme conditions, exactly what Hodges's thermal mass hearth had demonstrated during the January crisis. Wilson's planned hearth expansion would serve as a leadership example while providing his own family with heating security that conventional construction could not guarantee. 3 new settlers arriving in late February specifically sought Hodges's advice before beginning cabin construction. Word of the thermal mass heating success had spread beyond the immediate settlement through winter travelers and correspondence with families considering western North Carolina homesteading. These newcomers requested detailed consultations about site selection, foundation preparation, and construction scheduling that would accommodate extended hearth building timelines. The knowledge transfer process that began in March revealed the depth of technical expertise required for successful thermal mass construction. Hodges conducted stone selection workshops in local quarries, teaching neighbors to identify sandstone with optimal thermal properties, dense, flat stones without fracture lines that could expand and contract through repeated heating cycles without cracking. The selection criteria eliminated roughly 60% of available stones, requiring extensive searching that explained the extended construction timeline that had initially frustrated his neighbors. Construction technique demonstrations showed the precision required for proper foundation and mortar work supporting 1,800-pound stone platforms. Standard frontier hearth construction used basic clay and sand mortars adequate for smaller thermal loads, but thermal mass systems required lime-based mortars capable of withstanding expansion stresses created by repeated heating and cooling cycles. Heinrich, applying his European training to these requirements, developed mortar compositions specifically designed for thermal mass applications. Fire management instruction proved equally critical as construction techniques. Optimal burning schedules for maximum heat storage required understanding wood selection, fire timing, and flame maintenance that differed significantly from conventional frontier heating practices. Oak and hickory burned at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit when properly managed. Heating stones to surface temperatures of 85 to 90 degrees while avoiding dangerous overheating that could crack stone platforms or create unsafe sleeping conditions. Safety protocol education addressed concerns about burn risks and temperature regulation that sleeping on heated stones presented. Canvas and wool bedding systems required specific layering techniques that balanced comfort with heat transfer efficiency. Surface temperature monitoring prevented overheating that could cause burns, while proper bedding arrangement maximized beneficial heat absorption throughout sleeping hours. These techniques, learned through Hodges' trial and error during December and January, eliminated the learning curve that could make thermal mass heating dangerous for inexperienced users. The spring construction boom of 1878 brought unprecedented demand for thermal mass expertise throughout the region. 8 existing cabins underwent hearth expansion projects that required partial dismantling of existing fireplaces and reconstruction using thermal mass principles. 4 new cabins incorporated Hodges hearths from foundation planning through completion, integrating thermal mass requirements into site selection and structural design. The local quarry reported a 300% increase in flat stone demand, requiring expanded operations to serve construction projects throughout western North Carolina. Dutch Heinrich began specializing in thermal mass hearth construction, adapting his European masonry training to meet demand for heating systems that could handle extreme weather conditions. Heinrich's professional transformation from skeptic to advocate provided credibility that accelerated community adoption of thermal mass methods. His standardized construction specifications ensured consistent quality while reducing construction time through systematic approaches that other settlers could follow. Measurable winter outcomes from the 1877 to 1878 season provided compelling evidence for thermal mass heating superiority. The Hodges family's total firewood consumption of 2 8/10 cords compared favorably to the settlement average of 4 1/2 cords, representing savings of $23 in firewood costs, a significant sum for frontier families operating on minimal cash incomes. Health comparisons showed 0 cold-related illness in the Hodges household versus an average of 2 3/10 incidents per family throughout the settlement. Comfort metrics documented by families throughout the community confirmed that thermal mass heating maintained normal daily activities during the coldest period in local memory, while conventional heating forced activity restrictions and survival-focused behaviors that limited productivity and quality of life. Economic impact calculations showed that reduced firewood requirements freed substantial time and energy for other essential frontier tasks, improving overall homestead efficiency and family welfare. The spreading reputation of thermal mass heating techniques reached beyond the immediate Boone Fork settlement by 1880. Sleeping hearths were documented in 23 mountain communities throughout western North Carolina, indicating widespread adoption of methods that had begun with one man's willingness to challenge conventional frontier building practices. Technical variations developed for different cabin sizes and orientations demonstrated the adaptability of thermal mass principles to diverse construction requirements and family needs. Regional recognition came from building experts and government surveyors who documented the thermal mass heating phenomenon during routine frontier development assessments. Federal territorial reports noted improved cold weather survival rates in communities that had adopted expanded hearth construction. while county records showed reduced firewood consumption averages in areas where thermal mass techniques had gained acceptance. By 1890, visitors to the Boone Fork Valley could easily distinguish between older cabins built according to conventional frontier standards and newer construction incorporating thermal mass heating principles. The oversized hearths extending deep into cabin interiors served as silent testimony to one man's practical wisdom and the community's willingness to abandon inadequate methods in favor of superior survival techniques. William Hodges had proven that understanding natural heat storage was more valuable than following accepted building practices, creating a legacy that transformed frontier heating throughout the Appalachian region for generations.